Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Well, we made it, everybody. It's July 1st, 2025. We've gotten through half the year, and here we are. Got a couple of announcements for you. Number one, you came through yesterday. I said that we were at 14,800 subscribers on YouTube and that we really wanted to get over the 15,000 subscriber hump by close of business on June 30th, and you did it. We are at 15,400 subscribers. Thank you so much. Very important, very helpful to us. A sign of your support for the podcast and wanting others to see it, and we are very grateful. We are also very grateful to our friend Cliff Asness for agreeing to be the commentary roastee for 2025. This is our annual fundraising dinner here in New York City. I think it's either our 15th or our 16th roast. I can't remember. Previous roastees have included Ben Shapiro, Barry Weiss, Mayor Soloveichik, Natan Sharansky, my father, Norman Podhoretz, my late mother, Midge Decter, Bill Kristol, about whom we speak in respectful silence, the late Charles Krauthammer, Dick Cheney, and others. Cliff Asness, a hedge fund manager here in the Northeast, one of the funniest people I know, a member of the commentary board, a sage, funny guy. We have an incredible lineup of comedians, musicians, and others who will be serenading him and making fun of him at an event that most people who come to it think is the event of the year. I say that immodestly because I just hear it hundreds of times in the week after we do one of these things. It's not a normal rubber chicken dinner that people are obliged to come to and give money and hear boring speeches about how wonderful the honoree is. It's a much different, much more Hamish, much more amusing event that is just like punctuated with screams of laughter and a real sense of community and delight at being together. And so if you're interested in joining us, please go to commentary.org/roast. It's on October 19th here in New York City, commentary.org/roast, or you can go to our website and click on roast at the top of the banner, where you can also subscribe, you can donate, you can buy merch. There's just an immense number of things you can do in that top banner above the commentary logo. And you will meet my fellow panelists today at the roast. They are, of course, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Can I add that if you come to the roast, you will some years the commentary podcast actually puts on a hilarious sketch of some sort. So that's
we're going to do that. There are members of our team that are camera shy. I'd say a little camera shy, a little worried about showing off themselves to their best comic effect. But yes,
that's why it's off the record. The roast is off the record. That's
the roast
why
is totally off the record. Completely off the record. And 1 year, one joke that Dick Cheney somehow made it into the public prints because somebody did a bad and let it go. And you know who attacked us for having the temerity to have Dick Cheney at the roast and make a joke about about torture? Peter Beinart, whom I would like to torture. Speaking of torture, I don't know why I said speaking of torture, because the Senate is torturing itself with its conduct over the final passage of the big, beautiful bill. So we said yesterday that we thought it would be passed by last night. It still hasn't passed. I think a giant game of chicken is going on, and here's the game of chicken. 50 senators can vote against this bill, and it will still pass because J.D. Vance will break the tie and vote for it. So 2 Republican senators, Tom Tillis, now retiring, and Rand Paul, who's never going to vote for the bill under any circumstances, have said they're not going to vote for it. And so they can lose one more person without tanking the bill. And there are 2 moderate Republican senators, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine, both of whom have misgivings about the bill, even though they are literally 8,000 miles apart or something geographically. Like you couldn't have one's like out in the Bering Sea, one's out in the Atlantic Ocean, and here they are. They both don't want to vote for the bill. So I think what's happening is there's a game of chicken going on at which one or the other of them is waiting to see which one of them will allow the bill to pass by saying they'll vote for it, so that the other one can cast the vote against it and say, I didn't vote for the bill, without being blamed for tanking the entire bill. And so they are in a kind of standoff. We used to call it a Mexican standoff, but I guess that's culturally insensitive now to say Mexican standoff.
Go for it.
Mexican standoff.
There you go.
Okay.
Does it feel good?
I believe it's Latinx standoff.
Thank you very much. Latinx standoff. Although no, because Latinx covers many more ethnicities or nationalities than merely the Mexican. So it's a Mexican standoff. It'll be resolved. This bill is going to pass because the consequences of it not passing are a colossal tax increase or more of this. It's like it's just going to happen again. So you might as well get it over with now, because by the end of the year, there will be a bill that will pass that will feature a lot of these provisions. It's a terrible way to do business, but here we are, and that's life. And congratulations, living in America in 2025. Speaking of living in America in 2025, a very sobering poll came out yesterday, but which I think it tracks with everything that we've been talking about in relation to the Democratic Party, its relation to Trump, the vote for Zoran Mamdani yesterday or last week or whatever the hell it was, a week ago today. So Gallup asked, as it asks every year, whether you are proud to be an American or not. And this is a question I've been asking for decades and decades. And the Democratic Party number this year, are you proud to be an American, is 36%. Democrats say that they are proud to be Americans. Grand total of 36%. The Republican number is 93. Hold on, where is it? I'm having trouble here because I can't see anything. And I saved the tab, and now I can't find it. It's somewhere in the 90s, I believe. Does that sound right to you guys? It's in the 90s. Okay. And here's the thing. No matter whether Joe Biden is president.
92%. Sorry, it's 92%.
So whether or not it is Joe Biden who is president, or Barack Obama who is president, or Donald Trump is president, or, George W. Bush is president, no matter what, the Republican number is over 90%. Republicans are proud to be Americans. Independents fluctuate. The Democratic number, I believe, is never higher than 80. Even when Obama was president in 2009, and they were proud, as Michelle Obama said, she was proud of her country for the first time in her life because it was nominating her husband, whom she now apparently hates, and says she has happy not to have sons because they would be like him, which we haven't talked enough about, or maybe we shouldn't talk about it, but I mean, who the hell says a thing like that in public?
That was slightly misinterpreted. I think her remark was meant to say it would have been a burden for a son to think he had to live up to the incredible legacy of his father, and so that's why she was.
Didn't sound like that to me.
Well, I mean that's the spin. That's one way of seeing.
Double-edged sword thing. In other words, maybe that was her theoretical intention. That was those might have been the lyrics, though the lyrics were badly written if that was the case, but that wasn't the music.
No, I agree. It did not come off very well, but anyway, I think that was.
So Michelle Obama was only proud of America when it nominated her husband, and so here we are with the Democrats. They hate Trump. They don't like the direction of policy and all of that. So they're not proud to be Americans, and Republicans, no matter who runs things, are proud to be Americans, and independents are fluctuate because what do they know? They're that's okay.
So basically, Democrats, their baseline is not to be proud. When they get
Well,
someone
they're in
they
the
like,
70s, right? They're in the
then they're proud.
70s when they're proud.
Yeah, yeah.
But there will always be 25 to 30% of what we know is, for a generation, 25 to 30% of Democrats say they are not proud to be Americans. And then when things don't go their way, that number doubles.
But what's interesting
Or
is how
triples.
Republicans, since Trump in 2015, can be very pessimistic about, say, the direction the country's going, where we've been in the recent past. But the sense of patriotism, the sense of pride in what America stands for, the idea of America, who we are, what we should be doing, remains steady, and that's a far less transactional view of patriotism. I think it is notable that. I think Abe on our text chain last night when these numbers came out said the democratic support of this country so contingent on who's running it. And that's not patriotism. That's a very different, very transactional, very political view of what your country is and stands for. So the American carnage of first Trump term and the sort of very negative view of where the position the country's in now, that doesn't seem to chip away or corrode the conservative sense of pride in one's country.
Which is incredible, because I kind of think of Trump's core. Well, I have to keep reminding myself that the first Trump term is just different from this one, and so is the nature of his support and his supporters. But I really thought back in 2016 that he was sort of running down the U.S. almost as a daily talking point, and that had traction. But it did, as Christine says, it didn't translate into this sort of deeper, genuine disdain for the country. And to me, the biggest joke, or the most interesting thing about this is, so the Democrats are down in the 30s with their being proud of the country. They're the ones who are screaming their, lungs out day and night, saying, "Trump's ruining this wonderful democracy. He's a threat to the system, a threat to the Constitution." And they're the ones that are. Where's this love of the Constitution, of the enduring ideals of the institutions, whoever the is in the White House.
My favorite story about this topic was 2 weeks ago, just 2 weeks ago, on June 13th, Politico had a story, and the headline is, "Democrats Reclaim the American Flag." We see this every couple months, right? There's some story about, like, Democrats Democrats taking back the American flag. But then they poll them, and Democrats are like, "No, I don't like that flag." But this story was about one of a Democratic congressman from Pennsylvania handing out 4x6 flags to his peers, and along with a dear colleague letter that said, "Patriotism does not belong to one party. Flag and the values it stands for belong to every single American." And I think probably in 4 to 6 weeks from now, we'll see another Democrats Reclaim the American Flag headline alongside a poll showing that 4% of Democrats are proud to be American, or whatever it is. But there's this constant, it's like trying too hard. It's like protesting too much. It's like every so often they reclaim the flag by calling someone un-American or unpatriotic and using the words un-American and unpatriotic. We don't hear a lot about being American and patriotic in the interim. They don't talk much about what it means to them daily to be an American and what patriotism means. We only hear the negative versions of those words when they like to accuse somebody of being un-American.
Well, if you see patriotism as a brand, then you can always be reworking your brand, right? And there's a sense in which I'm glad you brought up that Abe's point about the institutions, because we continue to see on the more far left version of the Democratic Party an effort to say, the Constitution is no longer valid. It just can't cope with a leader as crazy as Trump or circumstances as complicated as the ones we now live in. So let's in a sense throw it out and start over. Let's reinterpret it so that it's no longer recognizable as having any founding principles. Let's get rid of the Electoral College. Let's do this. There's a lot of disruption and threats to the institutions that don't suggest any kind of pride in them. And I think that's the distinction, a sense of pride, a sense of, and this is where Obama did, I think, have a very strong negative cultural impact, which was to go around the world apologizing for who America has been and was. And there were a lot of young voters who looked at that and said, yeah, we should be ashamed of ourselves. And that doesn't mean that America has not, as a nation, done shameful things, and certainly our history suggests that. But that's not the way forward. And so weirdly, the Make America Great Again message, I think, resonated with that very steady stream of patriotic feeling among conservatives. And so that's where they saw the hope and the opportunity, despite, and I think we've spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about the way in which Trump himself has been destructive to certain principles and certain institutions.
Just on Seth's point about the flag, they got themselves into this. Wasn't it in 2019 or so when a bunch of liberal writers and outlets started writing pieces about how people see the American flag as a threat?
Yes.
How certain groups, when they see the American flag, it's a symbol of oppression to them.
I think it's worse. It's worse than that, because I believe that in some of the literature that was produced by that weird explosion of the disinformation tracking Christian nationalist seeking, where they were opening sort of parts of the Justice Department to look into domestic extremism, that the use of the flag was itself viewed as a piece of datum in a larger sea of whether or not people could or could not be trusted not to be domestic extremists who would use violence, that it had become a marker of violence rather than simply what it is. That was their doing. That was their doctrine. That when they were looking for bits and pieces of things that would allow these algorithms to deplatform people or stuff like that. Are there too many flags on their Twitter feed? Are there too many flags in the backgrounds of their their homepage or something on does the word patriot appear too much, that kind of thing. And so this is their doing. Like nobody else would say such a thing. It came out of this idea that symbols of American pride had become symbols of American counter-revolution or fascism or something like that, which is a pretty remarkable leap in a rational framework in a rational country. Now, we had gone insane, obviously.
Well, I was going to say there was that summer, there was that moment where you could drive through purple regions of the country, and half the things on the lawn were American flags, and the other half were "In this house we believe" signs, and it kind of captured perfectly that weird moment in the culture war.
Yeah, and we had gone crazy. I mean, George Floyd, the entire reaction to George Floyd, and COVID, and when you could demonstrate, and was it a time to be proud to be an American if you lived in a state where you were arrested if you went on a beach or if you tried to go on a playground? I mean, that's sort of thing that could shake anybody's sense of pride. And who reacted that way with outrage and anger? People on the right more than people on the left. And yet that number of natural pride did not decline.
But that's what's so it's interesting to track the right direction, wrong direction polling that's done in sort of day-to-day political life, whether you think the country's moving in the right direction or in the wrong direction, and then to see the baseline of patriotism, because it does suggest a real worldview difference in terms of how people generally on the left and people generally on the right view this country. If you think that the country's moving in the wrong direction, which I think most people who are registered Democrats would say now under a second Trump term, that somehow really implicates how you feel about America's purpose and founding and principles in a way that it doesn't for conservatives. And I find that fascinating. Lots of people said under Biden, the country was moving in the wrong direction, that we were between inflation and the border problems, especially if you were on the right. But that didn't seem to move the needle on how they felt about the nation. And that it's just a curious thing that in this probably started, we love to blame the 60s, but it did probably start in the late 20th century, this movement on the left away from pride in one's country, understanding so much of this is politically contingent versus about principle. And it's too bad. I mean, that might shift with younger voters, I hope, on the left, but we'll see.
I think it's going to go the other direction with younger voters, right? Because what is a land acknowledgement if not, the idea that we shouldn't be here in the first place, right? It's like it's like the line from Clerks, I wasn't even supposed to be here today, right? That's America to them. We weren't supposed to even be here. And then there's the way that American complicity is the word used so often, gets rolled into every bad thing that happens in the world. And if you're anti-colonialist now, you focus on Israel, but you also say, and America, this American capitalist system, is the engine of it all, and whatever the anti-colonialist and whatever the sort of academic anti-Americanism that we see on the left is very much like Great Satan and Little Satan type discourse, right? It's like we're yelling at Israel, but it all comes back to the Great Satan, which is America, except Americans talk that way.
But that is a very important point, because as we see these numbers, particularly among the young, of declining support for Israel, though I think it's wildly overstated or has something to do with the way the question is asked. But there are these declining numbers. There was one Pew poll that had Americans disapproving of Israel more than they approved of it. I don't see that you can't look at these Pride in America numbers and not see an analog or a parallel or a foundational expression of this. Americans supported Israel, particularly evangelicals, but Republicans after the 1980s, when this big shift happened, when Republicans went from being very lukewarm about Israel, or sort of 50-50 on Israel, to becoming overwhelmingly supportive of it. That was connected to national pride and issues of American national pride and acceptance of the idea that Israel and the United States were both nations formed on the basis of an idea or a set of ideas, and therefore were exceptional and connected in a way that almost no other nation is or was. I mean, there are a couple of other nations on the planet that were formed on the basis of an idea, like Liberia, right, which was a nation established to be a free place for former slaves in the United States. That's an idea. I don't know that I can think of many others that have that quality, that, and so America is based on a set of ideas that predate and are held to be higher than the country itself, in a weird way. In other words, when you write the Declaration of Independence and you say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What you're saying is that is superior to land and soil. It's superior to where you come from. It's superior to everything. It's an idea, and that was the binding glue of the United States as people from all over the world came to the United States to settle here. Was you could become an American because there was no such thing as an American per se.
This is the original principle of healthy diversity, and that's why it's ironic that the left sees this as oppressive. It was not. It was what allowed the kind of extraordinary diversity, right, both of faith, of background, of ethnicity, all of it. That's what made it possible. And so the fact that, and we're about, sorry to get all wound up, but we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of this extraordinary document which enshrined this principle.
Just on this point of diversity, so what's also somewhat ironic here is, as of yesterday, we were in Pride Month, right? Now that's LGBTQ plus whatever pride, right? And that's another factor here, which is that now you are supposed to be proud of your camp. You get your Pride Month, you get a Black History Month. I only learned this year there's a Jewish American History or Pride Month or something, right? But the thing about
It always goes very well.
yeah, the thing about these when it's Pride Month, when it's Black History Month, what is all the programming about? It's not really Pride. It's about the horrors that you've endured as as part of this segment of the population. The horrors you've endured as a result of being in the U.S.
What's missing on that side is gratitude. It's gratitude for what this nation represents and what it actually has achieved. It's a lack of gratitude.
By the way, it's not just gratitude about the nation alone, though we can get back to that. Now I'm going to get self-referential. I have a piece in the July-August issue of Commentary, which is called "We Are Awesome, a Rant." And it's a piece about anti-Semitism and the attempts to sort of denormalize Jewish life in the United States since October 7th. This is a surprising and astonishing attack on Jews, Jewish life, Zionism, the national aspirations of the Jewish people, which are foundational to Judaism, as I keep saying in relation to any Jew who says they support Zoran Mamdani, which is that the document that is the defining document of Judaism, Zion of the Torah, is a document that is the story of the Jewish people and its journey over millennia, practically, to the homeland that God has promised Abraham at the beginning of the life of the Jewish people. And so if you say you like Jews or you like Judaism or you're a Jew or something like that, and you actually say that the Jewish state the Jewish state shouldn't exist, that's anti-Jewish in a fundamental sense. But the central point that I tried to make in this piece is that the Jewish story is that Jews shouldn't have survived. The Jewish story is that after the expulsion from Jerusalem and from the Holy Land in 135 CE, no other tribe on earth would have withstood the 2 millennia of statelessness and homelessness and wanderingness and constant persecution by the people whom they lived among and whom they were a minority among. And yet Jews did survive and made it through and have this connection, this mystical connection, not even mystical, but actual practical connection to the past through the fact that, as I say, if one or another of us went into a synagogue if we time traveled and went back to a synagogue in the 13th century on a given Saturday, they're reading the same Torah portion on July 7th that they would be reading on July 7th in 1322. And I could read it, and I know the prayers, and I know the liturgy, and I know some of this has changed over time, but it's exactly the same faith with exactly the same book with exactly the same through line. And that's an astounding story. The Jewish story is a story of 2 millennia of persecution, of efforts every couple of centuries to wipe us out. The Inquisition, pogroms in Poland in the 17th century, pogroms in the 19th century in Poland and in Russia in the early 20th century, and of course the Holocaust and all kinds of other things. And yet here we are, and here's Israel, and here's Jews in America, and all of that. And so you can tell 2 different stories of Jewish life, which is Jews are the most uniquely oppressed people who have ever lived. They were oppressed in Egypt. They were oppressed by Joseph, was oppressed by Potiphar, at the beginning of the faith. And, but that's not the story that Jews choose to tell ourselves, and the story that we should tell ourselves, which is that, oh my God, this is astounding. We are part of this glorious, transcendent tradition that has survived for thousands of years. Similarly, Black people, whatever, you could tell the story that your history is one of constant oppression, or you can tell yourself the story that they brought you here, your people were enslaved, they were made to suffer hard labor in the fields and build things that were not their own and all of that. And then there was this moment of liberation and there was still oppression. And yet here we are in 2025 and you are still here. They didn't kill you. You are a fundamental part of the American experience. Children have the same connection to the past that Jews have to their past. That is awesome. That is a story of survival, of perseverance, that's pride. That's something to have pride in. But we've turned pride, as Abe says, into a celebration of victimhood, of tragedy, and of the acknowledgement of tragedy. A lot of us have had a problem for 40 years with the rise of Holocaust education, even though obviously we want people to know the Holocaust because we keep getting horrified that people don't know about it and then seem to forget that this happened within the memory of many people in our lifetime. And yet, here people are evoking it or saying you should go back to Germany when we can't go back to Germany because they killed us in Germany. When you live this life, you need to be able to look at the fact that you're there and say, I thank God for the life that I have. And that's also part of American pride, because why are we all, yeah.
This is why how American history is taught for several generations now is implicated in this problem. And and I see it, you see it actually, I saw a recent story about anti-Israel sentiment among young conservatives. And I was reflecting on that and trying to figure out, is it just anti-Semitism? Well, in some cases it is. But what it really is the fact that they see themselves only in negative contrast. So they say, we have to put America first, not Israel, but they don't really understand what that means. What does America mean? Why would you want America first if what you've been taught about America is, as we've been discussing, a narrative of persecution and moral ambiguity and all these things. So they're almost like a negative reflection of what they should be experiencing because they haven't been taught well. And that history, how history is presented, which for a couple generations now has been episodic and thematic rather than chronological, rather than a story of, as you say, John, of progress, of opportunity. Not a perfect story by any means, but one that has a trajectory towards freedom, not away from it, towards liberation, of opportunity, towards free enterprise, towards all of these things that actually are useful. I've spent the last week and now this week teaching college students and high school students, and I'm struck by how many of them will be quite critical of systems like capitalism. They'll say, capitalism this, capitalism that. But a lot of them will say, but of course, I'm very proud to be American. I'm so grateful to live in America. And I think that contrast where they've been taught that these oppressive systems are terrible and must be torn down, must be revolutionized, they struggle with that. They struggle with what that means when they're Americans, young Americans in particular. So that's something that we should think about when we think about how we present the history of our country to each new generation.
Go ahead. Sorry.
My favorite story, one of my favorite stories on this idea of how we present ourselves and our story, is about 100 years ago. When Churchill went to make the rounds in Mandate Palestine, he went to some of the Jewish settlements, and he went to Rishon LeZion, and which was and he went to Rishon LeZion, and the people there in the village had an argument over how they should greet Churchill. Should they? There were half. It was sort of a split over age, I think, but they were half that said we should show him how dangerous it is here to live as Jews in the desert, what we're doing here, and how tenuous our situation is, and and what we need, and all that, and the difficulty of this project, because we're trying to get support for it. And then the other half said, no, we should greet Churchill like he's coming to a kingdom. We should show him, look at all we've accomplished, look at how great we've done here. And that latter one was the one that won the argument. And when Churchill arrived in Rishon LeZion, there were like Jews on horseback at the village gates to greet him, like some sort of royal procession. And Churchill came back just glowing, like, we have to help these people. We have to this. They have made the desert bloom. All this stuff. But that's sort of that's the age old question of the story that we tell ourselves is it all somebody save us, woe is me, look at how difficult, or is it look at how difficult this position was when we started, and look at what we are able to accomplish here, which is a very American sensibility. The idea that we're going to go settle the West, and we're going to go keep exploring, and one day we're going to go to Mars, and all this other stuff, is that it is a very American, alongside a very Jewish thing, to end up at the and we survived, and now we eat.
So just to finish that story, so Churchill went to Israel, or went to Mandatory Palestine in 1921 as the Secretary of State for the colonies. So he went as an official of the British government to go see the British colonies, and it was a very important trip. You can read about it in beautiful detail in Andrew Roberts' biography of Churchill, which is one of the great books of the last 20 years. And yeah, so what he saw was a nation aborning, or a young, tough, vibrant, threatened people that were trying to build something new. And even though he was, of course, a conservative in the sense that he believed in conserving the old, he understood that where there was nothing, something was sprouting. The reason I brought up Holocaust education is precisely this. In my previous meandering monologue, is that there are these two ways of looking at Jewish life. One of which is Jews need to focus on the catastrophe that befell us, and tell everybody about the catastrophe that befell us, so that they can understand the catastrophe that befell us, so that they'll feel sorry for us, and so they'll be nice to us, because they'll know that something really monstrous happened, and therefore they should give us a pass. They should let us have our state. They should they should investigate crimes against us as hate crimes, and therefore give us a pass. And then the other view, which is sort of the Ruth Weiss view, which is, no, we need to show the world that we are here. We've been here for 3,500 years. We're going to be here for 3,500 more. And you know what? You give us a country, we're going to build a nuclear bomb. And if there's going to be a much more powerful and richer country 1,000 miles away that's going to give us trouble, we're going to infiltrate an entire society of people, sort of like Esther and Mordecai, have them live there for 20 years, take over the entire management structure of the country, and then destroy it from within, so that its program to destroy us is interfered with, and then convince the most powerful country in the world to come in with us on the effort to finally deliver the blow. That what the world needs to know is that the Jews have power, the Jews are strong, the Jews are self-confident, and that it is useless. Efforts to take us out are useless. So how does this connect now to the not having pride in being an American? Because you might think that we've run far afield. It's exactly the same. Why is it important for the United States to hit Iran's nuclear program, apart from protecting Israel? Because these countries need to know in the 21st century that we're not going anywhere. Because these countries need to know that we are going to police the planet for our own sake, not to make it a better world and make everybody nice, and Mike Gerson saying everyone is going to be free. That's all lovely, but it's tertiary to the main mission. And it's like, no, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon because we say so. And I don't know, at some point we can talk sweet reason and be nice and explain why it's danger. We've done this now for weeks about the dangers of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East and the problems of not taking care of problems before they become
Well, but
crises.
isn't it more it's even simpler than that, I think. It's not just that because we say so, it's because they want to destroy us and we will ensure. It's the same
Right.
reasoning that Israel correctly has about Iran, which is they have said over and over again for decades that they will destroy us, they will destroy
Yeah.
Israel. We are saying no, and I do think it's a signal also that we're not demoralized anymore. Because
Yeah.
there's been this period of time where you can see it in the language of foreign policy among our leaders. You can see it in the sort of cultural expression of what it means to be an American, and even the encouragement of a sense of shame rather than pride. We aren't a demoralized country. And I think that, particularly for young people, is a message that resonates. If you talk to them about, do you think America has a role in the world? They will say yes. Now, they're a little vague on what it should look like, and they've been fed a lot of stuff that maybe is misleading them about the particulars, but they have a genuine sense that we need to be a leader in the world, that we have been granted through this amazing gift of survival, a great power. And with power comes responsibility. And the responsibility aspect of it is the part that I think we need to teach more, particularly in K through 12 education.
And there's also, in the U.S. hitting Iran, it's also this message to the world that there are still things that we think are worth fighting for. We will pick up arms of one sort or another. We are not done with that aspect of survival.
Right. Well, Ben Rhodes last week said, "Oh, it's such a sad world in which people think that using military force is better than using diplomacy. How sad is that?" And the answer is, well, we tried this in the 1920s. It was called the Kellogg-Briand, act, and so the world forswear the use of war in 1929. Where did that get anybody?
Well, it's
How did that work out for you?
it's also a rebuke to the negativity that a lot of which comes from the extremes on the right, that says we're a decadent late stage empire. We really can't, the Enlightenment was a mistake. I mean, there's a whole strand of very
Right.
nihilistic thinking about what's possible anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's a rebuke to that reasoning as well.
I want to talk about this too, because I think I mentioned this yesterday, or I also did my other the Glock podcast and talked about it yesterday. So I don't remember when I said what and on which pod. This is the world that we live in now, and I can't remember.
Cross-pollination, it's fine.
Okay. So there is this astounding interview last week. Ross Doubt. We did talk about it.
We talked about it after the podcast yesterday.
Oh, we did. Okay. Ross Douthat's interview with Peter Thiel, which is on the New York Times website. It was his, he's got a podcast called Interesting Times. You can watch it, you can listen to it, you can read the transcript. So Peter Thiel, of course, one of the founders of PayPal, young conservative intellectual who was at the Stanford Review. I met him in 1994, 1995 when he was a kid, started PayPal. Very odd political figure, very gay, but very conservative, Catholic, supported Catholic institutions, intellectual projects like First Things Magazine and others, and then was one of the earliest tech people to support Trump. Obsessed with the notion of creating independent societies apart from government, right? He wanted to do seasteading, which was somehow plant islands where you could go that would be beyond the reach of the laws of all countries. And then famously said that everything was going wrong in tech because we were promised flying cars and instead we got Twitter. We got 140 characters instead of flying cars. And on this podcast, he begins by saying he'd had a conversation with Musk, and Musk is done with Mars. Musk's whole life ambition has been to go to Mars, and Musk in the last year has decided that it's useless to go to Mars because if you go to Mars, it'll just be woke. We'll get there and woke AI will control everything, and he doesn't want to do that, and he's done with Mars. And my God, what does it mean for the world if Elon Musk is done with Mars, says Peter Thiel. This is the future. This is, American ambition. And he can't handle it anymore, and this is just part of the decadence of our society, that ambitions like going to Mars are falling to pieces, and we don't innovate anything, and blah 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 blah. And I was listening to this on this thing that I have in my pocket that didn't exist 18 years ago, where I can say, how do I get from New York to Dublin, New Hampshire? And there'll be 5 of these things that didn't exist 18 years ago that will not only provide me with a route, it'll provide me with 3 routes. It'll tell me how much time it'll take for me if I get in my car to start driving there. If I'm on my way there and there's traffic building up ahead, it will direct me off onto another road to save 15 minutes. I've never had to take out a sheet of paper that will help me explain how to get there. This is just one tiny aspect of this revolution.
Call that thing a map, by the way. For
yeah,
you
the
kids
map.
listening. That's
right,
called a map.
Right. But I'm just saying, like, there are 10,000 billion different things about the last 40 years that suggest that we are going through a revolution that is entirely parallel to the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, that was extremely disruptive, and in which people went through a lot of trouble and a lot of heartache, and the emptying out of rural England into the factories that led people to get sick and have terrible life experiences and terrible conditions of, that had to be improved, just as we're going through the suicide epidemic and the social media effect on kids and our general seem to be alienation from each other and all of that. These are all aspects of everybody digesting this massive technological revolution. And these 2 leaders of it, these 2 people who are central to its existence, Musk and Thiel, are saying things like, it's all over, everything sucks, everything's terrible. How
but
crappy
to be fair,
is everything?
But to be fair, these tech titans have always had contempt for the messy, slow-moving, inefficient democratic process. So they're coming from a place where, I actually do believe that, Elon's worried that they should remake The Martian, but with like Ta-Nehisi Coates as the star instead of Matt Damon or something. His concern is that why replicate a society that he feels is rotting at its core? So, but they have also been very contemptuous of what, again, back to the founders and their principles, the idea that every human life has dignity and shouldn't be coerced, controlled, manipulated. And the pursuit of liberty is what we're guaranteed, the pursuit of happiness, but not the guarantee of happiness. And I do think that the Peter Thiel question that struck me as being interesting is when Ross asked him, like, do you think humanity should exist? He's become so nihilistic that he sort of paused to think, well, and you hear this on the extremes, more on the extremes of the far left, the kind of Extinction Rebellion people are the problem. And I do think there's a trickle down version of that where people look at the United States and say, no, we're the problem. This is the green revolution, where nobody wants to look at the numbers coming out of China and India and other places that produce the world's pollution. And instead they say you should drive an electric vehicle or else you're evil. So the moralization that overlies a lot of the tech guys' talk, I think is a way for them to avoid the fact that they don't actually like how the process works here in the United States.
I think that's right. And I think, look, I thought the interview was fascinating for so many reasons, and it's too much to get into when they.
But Ross's reaction face is it's why you should watch it.
You should watch it, and because when they come around to Thiel's ideas about the Antichrist and Ross's challenge to him, it was just beautiful and fascinating. But it is just generally a window into how some of these Silicon Valley types are so disconnected from humanity. When Thiel talks about why our current technological age is basically one of stasis, he seems only to be measuring progress in what any new industry or advance can contribute to GDP. That was his sort of way of dismissing the digital world. That it didn't add many. What did it really do for our GDP? So that's not an advance. That's a very strange way of looking at. I get it. The GDP means something, but that's not the only way to
But
measure it.
even that is demented, because I'm just looking this up. So PayPal, I think, hit it, or either was started or really sort of exploded outward in 1997. The GDP of the United States in 1997 was $8.5 trillion. The GDP in 2024, hold on. Where is the number here? I'm looking for the number. Come on, man. I'm getting percentages. I'm not looking for percentages. It's something like 25 trillion, I believe. In other words, it's tripled in 30 years. God, this is really, come on. This is a
And
nightmare.
it's ironic because it's the Peter Thiel level people in our economic class system who've benefited the most from that increase in GDP, and I think that's
Excuse
actually
me,
where
we're over 30 trillion in GDP.
Right.
We were at 8 trillion. So we have tripled, more than tripled in less than 30 years. And he's, as you say, he keeps saying, well, it's 0.5% of GDP here and half. What the hell is he talking? Again, it's like my brain is going to explode. I don't understand how you can look at the world in 1990. Yes, the world between 1860 and 1920 changed in so many revolutionary ways that the person who was born in 1860 saw the birth of the modern world in real time, right? Saw telegraphy, telephony, the internal combustion engine, air flight, mass communications, radio, television, bombing, aerial bombing, all good and bad things all at once. And none of that existed in 1860, right? So that was a kind of transformation, the likes of which the world has never seen and will never see again. But I'm 64. What have I seen in my lifetime? Space travel, men in space, the rise of the personal computer, miniaturization, 10 zillion things that have made the world entirely transformative. And it's like these guys are, ants sitting on top, like they even though they are part of the leaders of it, they have no perspective on how life has changed for the ordinary person. Like, yes, they're impatient for some transcendence. Peter Thiel wants to live forever. Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. People built Chartres Cathedral, probably the greatest building on earth. It took 250 years to build Chartres. Maybe it'll take us 200 years to be in a position where we colonize Mars. The people who started Chartres had an understanding that this task was going to be something that would have to be completed by their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren, and they didn't mind because they saw the world in a much different and more transcendental way. These guys, if they don't see transcendence 5 minutes from the moment they are interested in something, or see this as a kind of through line through history, which is a very Jewish idea, by the way, that history has meaning, they're disappointed. That the overwhelming subject of the Peter Thiel conversation with Ross Douthat is his deep disappointment in America. And that's where we can connect this, even though he's not a Democrat and he's not, it's not the 36% of Democrats. But if he can look at America and what it has done and be disappointed, and he's worth $5 billion. Yeah, what does a Zohran Mamdani voter think who's making $120,000 and sharing an apartment with two roommates in New York City?
But this is important because he can be disappointed, but he still is can retreat to his compound and enjoy the luxuries of his own success, which came because of this system. I think the thing that is worth listening to about these guys and their disappointment is the fact that actually some measurements of success and progress for Americans have gone down. Life expectancy for certain groups has gone down. People's sense of well-being and human flourishing has gone down. And so exploring why that is, what might cause that, and then how to fix it. Because their solution is always the same. It's more technology to solve the problems that technology might have caused, or throw money at this, new crazy scheme to go to Mars. But actually, these are problems that the founders had predicted would happen. They didn't foresee the things we struggle with now, but the idea was, if this problem arises, our system is literally designed to help everybody come together who disagree and find a solution that works. That's the 250 yard vision that you're describing with the building of Chartres. And we do not do enough long-term thinking, and we don't, both politically, but our cultural figures are not keen on long-term thinking, except in this like go to Mars way. But what's the path to Mars? What are the specific dates, like the space program used to do when you described that as being marvelous as a kid, John? They said, we're going to get to Mars by this date, or we're going to get to the moon by this date. We're really bad at strategic long-term thinking, and our cultural leaders reflect that.
But, strategic long-term thinking can be a terrible mistake.
Yes,
it's very complicated, because you can make a plan to do something that is already overtaken by events 5 years after you.
But the enemy of living in a society that does no long-term planning and that seems on the brink of bankruptcy is not
you have
great
now
either.
used the word that I think I've been struggling for this entire time. That there is an enemy engaged, that Americans and Democrats are engaged in, which is this kind of like, I don't know, there's something, I'm just not motivated. My life is not motivated, or I'm kind of depressed. Right? We talked about this the other day, that conservatives are happier than liberals by everything that we can measure shows it. And we've said it's because liberals are constantly told that the world is a terrible place and that we're going to blow up or melt, or, everything, and inequality, and that everything is structural and there's no way to save yourself from anything. But enemy is this idea. One of the classic ways you lived your life is the greatest of all Jewish jokes. Or one of the many great, there are so many great Jewish jokes, but it's the Jewish joke where a guy comes out, runs into a friend, and he says, how's your wife? And the other guy says, compared to what? Because it's like, you can't just say, you can't say, how's America? It's not that simple. I mean, I have pride in America. I live in America. I feel about America the way I feel about my family in many ways. But even if you don't have that connection, or you don't like your family or whatever, compare, where are you going to go? Tell me a place that's better.
By the way, that Thiel and Musk do not have wives. And I mean, there's something in that joke that
Thiel has many wives. Musk has many wives. Elon has
a harem. He doesn't have wives.
Well, he had a wife. He's had wives.
Well, he has ex-wives.
He was married to Grimes.
Guys have ex-wives.
He was married to Grimes. Plentiful. Yeah, right. Right. Well, yes. So Thiel doesn't have a wife, but I'm just saying meaning, like, aside from everything else, even if you don't have a transcendent experience of understanding in your heart the depths of the Declaration of Independence, or you don't believe in the nation of ideas or something like that, where do you want to live? Where do you want to live on this planet? Even if you are one of these people who is suicidal in their basement on fentanyl playing video games, where are you going to go that's going to free you from that? Exactly. That's a soul sickness. It's not cure. It's a problem of our existential crisis created by living in the era of technology and in a post-religion atmosphere. But where are you going to go? At least, this is where Zohar Mamdani comes in, at least 100 years ago, when these radical socialists were living their deranged fantasies and hopes of revolution in the United States to overthrow the existing order, they had a model in their heads. It was an insane berserk model. They wanted to live in the Soviet Union or in a communist country, and they therefore overlooked all of the evils that were there, that were going on there, or pretended they didn't exist or something. But they had we want to be that and not this. And now we don't want to be us. We want to be what? What do they want to be? What is a Democrat who's not proud of America? Where would he be proud of? What country would he go to where he would feel pride? And there was this experience in the early 60s where black nationalists moved to Ghana. Maya Angelou moved to Ghana. A bunch of people were living in Ghana. I believe Zoran Mamdani is named for the president of Ghana. right? Named Nkrumah. His middle name. They went there because they said, okay, here's this new world that we can live in as free, as black liberated black people, where we can manage. And they lived there, and then the country went totalitarian, and they came back. Malcolm X in the autobiography talks about going to Ghana and saying, wow, this is kind of amazing here in Ghana. Like, I just met this woman named Maya Angelou. She's really fantastic. And then he came back, and then he didn't like it either. So I don't know.
It's the search for belonging in a way that, and you see that, I mean, we have versions of this with celebrities who, after every election that a Republican wins, announce loudly that they're moving to Europe or something. And then many of them also come back. But this pursuit of belonging.
Timothy Snyder and his wife, of course,
Right.
have moved to Canada.
Right.
Because he got a $500,000 deal at the University of Toronto or something.
That's actually why I said anomie, because when I listened to Teal, look, Teal has a husband. We shouldn't. When I'm talking about Elon Musk and his harem, it's just in part because I think having children is a vote for the future. It suggests some optimism about what comes next. And we are seeing also declining birth rates in this country and throughout the world. So when you think about this sense of belonging, yes, people can go to other countries and they come back, because I think what the lesson they learn is that America is unique in welcoming others, even at this time of immigration debate and who we accept and who we don't, and how they enter the country legally. This has always been a place that's rather rapidly welcoming once you're here. And if you compare that, if you've ever lived in a foreign country, you learn that lesson immediately. You can be accepted, you can live there, but the sense of belonging and community takes a very long time in some places, because they are not built on the idea of ideas. They are built in France, for example. You're not truly French unless you meet certain criteria, and that's true in many countries. So that the radicals often have to leave to come back and appreciate that.
I want to paraphrase C.S. Lewis, because you were talking, reminded me of something you said when you were talking about like the Mamdani voters and what do they want, where do they want to go, and as he wrote, and this was, he was talking about British educators last century, and he said they don't teach theories, they teach assumptions. And that is what the Mamdani voter has. No theory about what would work and why and better. They have an assumption that this is bad, and that is all they need. And that's what they're going on. Mm-hmm. They have never thought it through beyond that.
It's a very difficult thing to sort through, in my view, because it's very hard to understand living in the United States for me and not feeling pride in being an American. I mean, it requires me to interpret the behavior of others without even being able to summon up the empathy that would explain to me how they get to this feeling, because it's so deep rooted in me, and so I then look at the Mamdani vote, and the question that I guess is raised by all of us as we look at this, and we say, okay, well, he was actually only chosen by a pretty small minority of overall New York voters in a primary. Do people really believe what he believes? And how many believe in what he believes? And I keep thinking, well, it can't be that many, really. It's not that they know that they like.
And does he really believe what he believes?
I believe he believes what he believes. I have no problem believing that he believes what he believes. Why shouldn't he? He is a person entirely divorced from cause and effect in his entire life. So the idea that, one of the reasons you're not supposed to be a socialist or you're not supposed to be an anti-Zionist is cause and effect, right? So it's like, if you eliminate billionaires, or if you have the government run grocery stores, or we have centuries of history and simple economic logic that says to you, there's no, as Robert Heinlein said, there's no such thing as a free lunch. If you're going to give everybody free stuff, somebody's got to pay for it. And then, that is a terrible system, because then people skim money, however you want to slice it. He's a guy, grew up, came to this country. His parents had free housing at Columbia. He had free schooling at Bank Street. He had free schooling at Bronx Science. I'm sure he had a scholarship at Bowdoin, even though his parents are very well-to-do. And he has grown up without having had to have a job. He lives in a $2 million apartment in Chelsea. He is a person whose entire life is divorced from elementary cause and effect that would lead him to have any sensible notions or ideas about how the world works.
Then isn't the question, it's a question about the
But that's not his voters, but that's him.
The pathologies of the Democratic Party right now are less about him and more about why there weren't alternatives to him that were palatable to the primary voters. And this is a problem on the right too. And that's a broader problem, to get back to the patriotism idea of America. It's difficult to recruit people to run for political office now for a number of reasons. But one of them is that it's difficult to go up against an extremist and come out looking anything other than battered and, beaten up certainly on social media. So the Democratic Party couldn't find anyone other than Cuomo to actually launch any sort of reasonable challenge. And we do see this if you look at congressional elections and even state and local elections. It can be very difficult to recruit good candidates for higher office. And that, I think, has to be linked to, in some way, each generation's understanding of service, of obligation, of wanting to perform those roles. Many smart people just say, why would I bother? Well, we need more people, good people, to bother with politics.
Well, that is also a transitional thing about our time, which is to say that you're saying, why couldn't the Democratic Party? There is no Democratic Party. The Democratic Party does not exist. It is basically a kind of shell that has administrative and technical jobs to do in relation to elections. But there is no brain trust that chooses candidates, that elevates people, that moves them through the ranks, sort of like a farm team system in baseball and that sort of thing. You individuals decide whether they want to run for office. It is then up to them to fundraise for themselves, to make a showing for themselves, and all of that. This is all the result of changes in the campaign finance system that disempowered parties and empowered everybody else. And things are not yet sorted out. In an odd way, Trump's takeover of the Republican Party and turning it into this one-man band, despite the fact that everybody looks at this and says, well, this is terrible. It's a cult of personality. It's not a party anymore, and it's only at his whim. But he is creating a form of centralized party control that institutionally could live on after him, that will make the Republican Party a more organized thing in some fashion when he departs office than it was when he came in, because he exploited its very weakness to get himself the nomination and then the presidency in 2016. But he has already seen that that is not a functional system by which to exert and get things done as a matter of, executive power or partisan power. And the Democrats simply have none of that, in part because of this atomization, because of balkanization and identity politics being elevated over the fact that being a Democrat or being a Republican was once a form of tribalism itself. One of the few forms of tribalism we had before we went so balkanized and tribal was not that you were a liberal or a conservative, but that you were a Democrat or that you were a Republican was one of the defining things about you as an American. And that, although people crossed party lines much more than they used to, it was at least something that was a defining characteristic, and it stopped being. But let me just ask you, Christine, you're not running for city council in Washington.
Yeah. I don't know. Never say never. I'm still young-ish.
Okay.
No, I'm not. I'm middle-aged. I'm thoroughly middle-aged.
Second shout out of the week for Bethany Mandel, Seth's wife, who did in fact run for office in Montgomery County, trying to
our commentary contributor Naomi Riley ran for school board. We have there are lots of people actually contradicting my broad and sweeping statement earlier. Yes.
No, but
good people.
No, but I mean, yeah, you have other things to do. It's just an interesting thing that the cream of the crop.
My retirement project.
look, there were always two kinds of people in politics. There were like hacks who went into politics almost as like a career as kids, and they went through the machine and they did this and they did that, and they were, graft and all that, and then they're sort of non-entities, and they got slotted into things so that the bosses could control them, and then they became congressmen and senators and things like that. And then there were sort of like the best and the brightest who wanted to be a part of the American experiment. And no, I don't mean that's a term, that's a bad term I used, but sort of people who wanted to be part of the American experiment and exert themselves as, public representatives and all of that, who had much higher, loftier goals and principles and believed in representative democracy and stuff like that. It's that second tier. I mean, in some ways, both tiers have vanished because there is no career to be had like going through the political ranks in party terms. And there doesn't seem to be any profit in wanting to be like a good senator.
There's another problem that's new, which is that I would say from this moment onward, who would want to go into politics when we live in a world where everything you have ever done, said, written, laughed, joked about is recorded somewhere?
Yeah.
I mean,
okay, I come back to why Gen X will save us, because look, I was in the marching band, but that's not online because I was pre-internet. Right. So we are the transitional generation that might have to do that job.
Well, it's also the nationalization of politics, because the thing that happens, the things that are decided by your local government are much more, will impact your life on a daily basis, probably more than what your state decides and then your national government decides and all that stuff. So, but that just has been completely swept aside. The idea that nobody wants to spend their time, half their time at Borough Hall, and half the time on the planning board of adjustment or whatever. But that's what people used to do, and it was a way to rise up, but it also was a way to stay where you were. You didn't necessarily have to have national ambitions if you wanted to be, on the Toms River Borough Council or whatever it is. But that, if you were on the school board locally, right, especially, where I come from in New Jersey, you got to decide what everybody paid in taxes.
Yeah.
These were the things that mattered day in and day out to you. And I feel like there's just like, it's harder to find local news. It's harder for local news to make it in, especially print, in this, in the digital world. It's harder for anything really to be localized. And I think that sort of dismissiveness toward the idea that, well, what's your ambition? You want to be a city councilman? Well, yeah, and mayor, like, you don't have to run for president after being mayor of the third largest city in Indiana. You can just be a mayor in Indiana who likes what he did. But no, I'm going to run for president, and then I'm going to be transportation secretary, and then I'm going to maybe run for Senate or governor of Michigan. It's like there's always something. Once you get to mayor, it's like there's always something. What can I use this for?
This is an important point, because I want to get back to Christine saying, why couldn't the Democratic Party have surfaced da-da-da-da-da? So there were 3 candidates in the mayoral race in New York City who, under conventional understandings of who should be mayor when there's an unpopular mayor who should be defeated for re-election, which is the case with Eric Adams, who were in the race. Scott Stringer has been a New York City pol for 30 years, has had 3 different jobs. Brad Lander is the controller. Scott Stringer was the controller. And Adrian Adams was the head of the city council. So you had the 3 top jobs in New York City, candidates who had been doing local spade work for decades and had shaken the hands of tens of thousands of people and gotten hundreds of thousands of votes, going into this race as mayor and getting absolutely no purchase.
Yeah, I guess I should have phrased the question as, why didn't Democratic voters turn to those people that were in the race?
Because
I guess
the party,
it's about what the voter wants in a politician.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, it's not even that they're bad I mean, Brad Lander is a disgusting person, so I'm glad that he didn't go anywhere, and Scott Stringer is not, and I don't think would be a better mayor than any of the people who are currently maybe contesting for it, but wouldn't have been my favorite. But these are people who did the work, and now doing the work doesn't matter. And that's a real problem in politics because, you know, you learn things. Maybe it makes you too cautious, but you also learn things about what is and what is not practicable. And that is like Trump first term. Like, Trump wanted to do things or get things done or have things done, and sort of had to learn on the job that you couldn't just wave your hand and have things happen. That's America is a system that exists. Our government system is that exists to retard change, not to facilitate change. And he didn't know that because he was a businessman and he knew nothing about politics. And so that world is a world in which people who learn that lesson then come to run, say, hi, I'm a realistic person who wants to try to do good for you. And it's like, well, that's not exciting. Tell me you're going to change everything for the better, right? And so I don't know. I've no solution to this problem. But I do just want to point out again, Democrats, 36% of Democrats say they're proud of America, and that's shameful. It's a fact. It's not, maybe it's not shameful because it's a thing that we have to deal with, but it means that there is a patriotic party and there is a party that is not patriotic. And it's, how that goes over time, I really don't know. No wonder they're not celebrating what happened in Iran. They don't think that America dropping a bomb on a totalitarian, irredentist, millenarian, anti-Semitic regime and making sure that they can't project their power in nuclear terms or trying to work at making sure that doesn't happen is something worthy of celebration. Because nothing is worthy of celebration, apparently.
And so on brand to bring it back to the crushing morosity.
I know. Okay, I'm going to make a recommendation, even though we've gone on for like 3 hours. We haven't made a recommendation in weeks, and I'm making a recommendation. I think someone made it already, but I'm now doing it months after because I only started watching this thing a couple of days ago. The Pit on Max is the best medical show that's ever been made. It's an absolute. I'm 9 episodes into 15. It is an absolute masterpiece. It is the Aristotelian realization of the Platonic conception of what a doctor show should be. I don't know how better to say it. There has never been a doctor show as good as this. I've seen them all. I love them all. It is a breathtaking achievement. If you are not watching it, go watch it. It's a little woke. It's not that woke, fortunately. I didn't watch it because somebody told me it was woke, and then I was like Elon Musk, I didn't want to go to that Mars if it was going to be woke. And there's a little bit of it, but compared to other things in show business, it's not so bad. And you're just never going to see you're never going to see a better television show than this, in my view. Anybody else watched it? All right, start watching it. We'll be back tomorrow. For Christine, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.